3 p.m. I'm your host, Wim Lu. It has come for the weekly Alex Wong takes a day off day. So he's at home producing, leaving me alone in the studio. However, I still have two close friends coming on the show for today's program. First up, we have Vivek Jacob of Raptors.com. What's up, V? Big game today in the Prem. Are you excited?
Oh, I'm hyped, man. I'm ready to do the preview. City versus Arsenal. Let's go.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Liverpool versus West Ham. With Trent Alexander-Arnold moving into the midfield against Basmati
Still got
Rice
those
over
top
there.
four hopes.
I mean, fringe. I would say they're fringe right now. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, a huge matchup coming up in the
I
Premier
mean, you
League.
got to finish above Tottenham, right?
I mean, it's looking good. It's looking good these days on that front. Why?
Out comes Mignolet, but Barr
Wow.
punishes of all people Steven Gerrard. It's a terrific moment for Chelsea.
That is savage from Derek. That is savage.
He plays this all the time. The thing is, sometimes he'll play the extended clip too. It's ridiculous. Okay, so V, this is what Alex sent to you is my 10 things column. I've essentially just broken it up into two parts. I'll go through one of the parts with you, and then on the second half of the program, I'm going to go through it with Savannah as well. But before we get to the 10 things on the Raptors season, just wanted to pass along some news and notes. So Otto Porter Jr. has officially picked up his $6.3 million player option for the 2023-2024 season. We'll see when he returns and is able to get back on the court after suffering the toe injury. V, what was your reaction to this news when you saw that Shams alert hit yesterday?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
It definitely makes sense from Otto's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think he'll look at this upcoming season as a chance to just move away from what happened last year. I'm sure on some level he was waiting to see how things played out from a coaching perspective, and now I think it opens things up for the front office as well. To use as a trade chip or whatever it might be in the summer, right? And we'll see where the relationship is at in that regard.
Yeah.
But the theory of Otto Porter was great. It's just we just never actually saw it on the court for long enough. And so the Raptors, as we know, need all the shooters they can get. And so if he can act, and this is the thing, it's always going to be ifs when you talk about Otto Porter. If he can be healthy, then it's a good piece for the rotation to have.
Yeah. No. Look, for the 8 games that he played, I thought he did bring contributions. And obviously the 3-point shooting is something that this team badly lacks. But at the same
bar
time,
is very low for the bench.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm also just very curious. Like, does he even want to come back in this scenario? Obviously, he picked up the option. That doesn't necessarily mean that he wants to come back. So we will see. We will see. At the trade deadline, I did believe my official stance was I was willing to take a top 55 protected pick for him. So we will see how it goes. But if you, look, as you mentioned, the theory of him on the team makes sense. Unfortunately, other injury news to pass along. So Kawhi Leonard, obviously didn't play for a significant portion of the series between the Suns and the Clippers. It started off so promising. The first 2 games were like just exhilarating basketball, and then the games are still fairly close. Credit to guys like Norm, credit to guys like honestly Mason Plumlee, Bones Highland, Eric Gordon, Russell Westbrook. These guys obviously made a game of it, but like obviously the Suns were going to roll. So that series is over. They got eliminated last night. It was reported that Kawhi has a torn meniscus. Obviously, we know that obviously Kawhi is a very important figure here in Toronto, even after he's moved on. But it's just such a shame. What was your reaction hearing that news?
Yeah, it's really sad. I think, for me, the reality felt like we are never going to see him in a full postseason again. Like,
Man.
To take the time that he took to get right, to have that ramp up period after the All-Star break where he's playing all these games. I was surprised that, that one time he did play in the back-to-back as well, both ends of it. I was like, this seems unnecessary. But to have that ramp up period, to have the games 1 and 2 that he did, to be hit with this now, like I tweeted this. I think you might be in a stage of his career now where he might need load management in the playoffs too. And so, what
That will never fly.
how
Man. That's just not going to fly.
no, but
Sorry.
how would teams evaluate that, right? In terms of his value,
Yeah.
in terms of his next contract, all of that. But again, you have this player whose ceiling is right there with anyone, right? But when he is going, I will, and I said this too. If you just take that peak version of Kawhi, put it across peak LeBron, peak KD, peak Giannis, peak Steph, he's right there with all of them. And so I am absolutely certain that teams would still see value if you were to say, hey, we can get Kawhi for like 4 or 5 games of a 7-game series. You're still taking that, but I think it comes down to what value do you apply to that now?
Yeah.
So is he a guy now that is always just going to play, 50 games in the regular season plus whatever he gives you in the playoffs? Like, how do you manage that? And the contract maybe bears out from there, but I don't know if you can trust him to just go game after game in any setting, whether it's regular season or playoffs anymore.
That's such a shame. Because as you mentioned, like, Kawhi has a legitimate case to be like the best playoff performer in the game. But he just obviously has not been able to stay healthy. To your point about like even load managing in the playoffs, like I just think that how would you even manage a locker room with that situation, right? Like I think that from us as fans, like we look at it like, or as media, like we look at it like Kawhi obviously is a cut above. He's deserving of this extra treatment because you'll put up with it so long as you get that A-level production, which we know is super rare. However, I think from the player's perspective, most players feel like they're essentially not their Kawhis and they're as good as Kawhi, but they're expecting to be treated like first class with everything. And I think when you have a player who's given every single exception like that, I feel like it does. I don't know. I don't say it corrodes the locker room, but I just got to say you got to have a really super strong like culture. You know what I mean? To be able to sustain that.
I think that's where it comes down to the contract. I think that's where you can't give him like a supermax and say that he can just load manage throughout.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's fair.
I think this is where you probably draw the line on what his contract looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to have structures in place where you say, okay, you're no longer in that category where we can validate giving you the supermax. And so, how much are you willing to come down from that?
Yeah.
And then I think if he wasn't like the highest paid player on the team, then, I think maybe in the locker room that sits a bit better. But I think it's a shame that, we're having these types of conversations, right? Like clearly he is, when he's on the floor, he's one of the best players in the game. He's one of the best players of this generation.
Yeah.
And, to look back now on 2019 and think that might be the best extended playoff run, the last best extended playoff run that we've seen of him is amazing that it happened here in Toronto, but sad.
It's very sad because I'm just looking at his career, like the 16-17 season, that year, which was essentially the last year he played for the Spurs. The following year he played 9 games, but obviously, he wasn't really there. That season he was up for MVP. I think he ended up being third behind Harden and I believe Westbrook. He was genuinely incredible. We saw that throughout the playoffs as well until he got injured, with Zaza sliding under his foot. That he was 26 years old at that time. He's now 30. How old is he? 31. He's going to turn 32 in like 2 months. So over the summer he's going to be 32. Like that's such a long time of your career to sort of be in and out. And the only healthy period in between all of that is the 2018-19 season. Exactly. No, his whole prime has just been like
your physically prime.
Yeah, the whole prime has just not really been there except for 2019. Obviously, the load management system helped, but like he was able to play through all 16 games of the playoffs. We saw him play through some injuries, as a member of the Raptors. Ultimate respect for that. The following year, that was the bubble. He was actually fairly healthy for the Clippers that year, and including he played in the playoffs. He just got bounced and blew a 3-1 lead. But the 2 playoff runs since then, and that sandwich in between the 2021-2022 season where he just missed the entire year with the torn ACL, he hasn't been able to finish those playoff runs, and it's just like, man, it's. I mean, we're getting you're exactly like the whole prime essentially is starting to really go for him. So it's such a shame. But yeah, moving on to the Raptors topics that we had for today. So this is one of the two parts of the 10 Things column. This one that we sent you was 10 Things with Nick Nurse fired. Masai Ujiri now becomes the focus with the Raptors. And we'll start with the Nick portion of this. We've sort of talked about the coaching thing so much over the last 2 weeks here, but I just wanted to hear from you, like, in your assessment of it, after seeing all the fallout and all the reporting and obviously all the stuff that you've sort of seen just being around the team and stuff like that, were you surprised by this news? And has there been anything that's come out since that has caught you by surprise?
I was not surprised by the news. I think, when you looked at the delay in Masai speaking to the media, obviously he wanted to not have a repeat of what happened with Dwayne Casey, right? Where he did the end of season presser, back Dwayne Casey, then comes out a few days later and he's like, well, Dwayne Casey's gone. So I think he wanted to be clear about the vision going forward. And I think when you look at the comments that have been made, it did come off as if Nick Nurse was a bit of a lame duck down the stretch, where I think on both sides, they knew that he was moving on. That probably leads to those comments that he made in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably the final nail, right? Like,
yeah,
again, it was unprompted. For him to just come out and say that was a bad sign, and everything that played out from there, was in line with that. And so I think now you're in a situation where obviously Ime Udoka has made his decision, and
mm-hmm.
You probably wait to see how the rest of this first round plays out and see what the fallout is. And hopefully a few candidates open up. We'll see what happens with Ty Lue with the Clippers. Already thanking, the front office and Steve Ballmer. But I think now, you've got the biggest takeaway is that you need to reset the culture, right? And I think the things that sort of leaked out with Nick Nurse, I think that is someone who maybe just didn't care for the consequences anymore, right? And I think he was just going to go about his business, and whatever the fallout was, he was comfortable with. We saw even Michael Grange write about it. It's not like Nick Nurse was like desperately trying to hang on to his job, that final week when they are having the discussions, right?
Yeah.
Like, all right, you're moving on, I'll move on too. No problem.
No, I get that from a human perspective. I really do. I mean, even when you think back on the comments that he did make in Philly, like, my sense of it is like, even Masai was like, look, listen, Nick, we're going to have to evaluate your future at the end of the year. And then Nick's like, all right, I guess I'll say that publicly to the media. You know what I mean? Like, so
yeah,
it's one of those like break up with you before the other thing kind of drops. But yeah, I just think that, when you think about some of the problems, because obviously we've seen some of the success stories with Nick as a coach, right? But I think we saw some of the things that, players sort of discussed either on or off the record, sort of like why so many public call outs, sort of communicating through the press. A lot of the players didn't really see time on the court, didn't really get an opportunity to play. How did that affect their buy-in and their morale in the locker room? We saw a couple of things with assistant coaches. I looked into that just a little bit further. I don't think it was as dramatic as it was. Yes, there was that one incident with Earl, but I think they actually patched it up from that point onward. But ultimately, like, there were definitely some concerns with the coaching staff itself. And then, of course, I think probably more than anything else is just like a lot of players had very unclear roles as to sort of what their jobs were on the team, which did make it very difficult to assess sort of their performances. So I guess my question is like, we see this pattern in football all the time, right? You let go of one manager, the next manager comes in, takes an entirely different approach. So is that what the Raptors need? Do we need someone to take a very different approach than what Nick took?
I think so. I don't think you can come in with the same approach because then players are just going to look at it and say, okay, what was all of this for? And so I think a fresh perspective in terms of strategy, a fresh perspective in terms of how to handle a locker room, and fresh perspective in how you deal with the media, right? And so I think those are the big things. I think absolutely, even if it's subtle changes, right? Like when we talk about the players getting called out publicly, even if the new coach were to come in, if they were to just make sure that they have that conversation in private first,
Yeah,
then it comes off very differently once you do that and then go to the public.
sure.
And so I think even subtle changes like that can make a difference. Obviously, my preference in terms of coach and in terms of players is always, hey, you keep everything in the locker room. Whatever you need to say, you can say to the person directly. And if you can't do that, then that's probably a bad sign. And so, uh, that would be my preference in a head coach. And, in terms of especially building that unity and that trust right now,
Mhm.
I think that would probably be the best way to go. And I think if players saw that, that's how you can build a relationship. And then, from there, you can build out onto, your other philosophies and whatnot.
Yeah, that's fair. And by the way, Chris Boucher on the House of Play podcast over at Yahoo Sports Canada, we reference it all the time on this show. But he had a
Hmm.
really, really great episode. As always, Chris was pretty forthcoming about sort of where he was at with the season. And he had this clip about sort of bringing back that Raptors culture that Masai talked about so much in his press conference. Here's that clip.
I mean, I think when they say change, it's just bringing back what it was before. If you look at Toronto basketball and the guys that were here and all that, like guys used to I feel like they work extremely hard and like even if like you didn't have the best talent in the league, like you would definitely find a way to be one of the best teams. And collectively, you would be the best. You'd make players look amazing. But I think that we lost that a little bit just by, like Masai said, man, a little bit of selfishness for sure. I think that we definitely got caught up into whatever the media was saying. Obviously after the first year that we had, we all felt good, thinking that next year we were gonna do something, and we didn't. And I think we needed that reality check to realize that we need to get better, not just as a team, but eventually. I think everybody needs to work on their game, like me, everybody off the bench, just so we could do something off of it too. But
Yeah. V, I mean, what's your reaction when you hear that? Because to me, that's pretty damning. I think two things really stick out. It's the needing the reality check after buying into the hype last year,
Hmm.
and then the other portion about getting that identity back, where it's hard work above all else.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you associate with this team over the last decade was that the whole was always greater than the sum of its parts. And so when you watch this season play out, and even when Masai is saying, I did not enjoy watching this team, that was very evident, right?
Mhm.
That it was always just, the individual sums, never actually coalescing together to create something that was bigger than themselves. And so um, I think it's great that you're at a point now where you recognize that everyone recognizes that, and it needs to change. And I think the biggest thing I'll say now is when you get rid of the coach, the onus is on the players now. And when they see that, they should recognize that, okay, this is not something that is going to be tolerated. Masai said, hey, the players who commit to that type of style will stay, and the ones who don't will go. The onus is on the players now.
Mm.
The coach cannot be used as an excuse, as valid as it was. And now the players have to show that brand of basketball that shows togetherness, that shows spirit, that shows that this Raptors culture, that this season was an anomaly to what the Raptors culture usually is.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Um, so two players, sort of who had a lot of potential, a lot of hype coming into the season, but I think were fairly disappointing. Gary Trent Jr. and Precious Achua. I want to start with Gary. Look, he had good moments. There's no doubt. I think there are skills that he brings, most notably with shooting and even the ability to get to your shot individually. That I think that are premium skills that this roster doesn't have in
Hmm.
excess of. However, he was also benched twice, and I felt like his defense regressed from where it was at the start of last season. Do you see a future here for Gary? And then we'll move on to Precious.
With the way things played out at the end of the season, I'm not sure that I do. But in terms of the way the Raptors have operated in the past, I
Mm.
could see them leaning towards saying, "Hey, we can at least try and maintain having this player who will have value to other teams and try to recoup something more along the lines of what we want."
Okay,
I
that's fair.
think with Gary, what's happened this season, uh, you know, I think some of the deflection and steal stuff from last season was probably overhyped. When Chris Boucher talks about things being overhyped, that's probably one thing
Hmm.
that I would list for Gary individually. And I think he was a lot more exposed this season, partly also because Fred Van Vliet as an all defender declined.
Mm.
And so I think when you have those issues at the point of attack across both your guard positions, then it becomes that much more exacerbated. And so I think uh, that is something that the Raptors have to look at, the on ball defense. You know, you're only as switchable as the positions you can guard, right?
Yep.
And I think we saw this with Scottie too. When he was put up at the point of attack, he wasn't great at keeping guys in front, right? And so that was a clear point I think to me, that is something that you have to look at this offseason and address. And so if you maintain the status quo with Fred and Gary as your backcourt, I think that would be a major concern.
Yeah, no doubt. Defensively, I noted in the piece that the ending of last season and the ending of this season was very similar. In Game 6, the Sixers specifically targeted Gary Trent Jr. on defense with James Harden in the pick and roll, and that really allowed the Sixers to really spiral and get into a huge lead in the second half and close out that series. And then in the play-in game, Gary didn't see that much time, but when he was on the floor, the Bulls immediately, like literally as soon as he touched the floor, targeted him on defense. And I do think that, yes, his skills are good in terms of the shooting, but you need to add a secondary skill. And I think that that's probably why he got sent to the second unit. By the way, all these comments, we will not be mentioning them when Gary Trent Sr. comes on the show this Friday in studio, baby. Can't wait. No, I'm kidding. I will raise those as well. I think for Precious, another young player who
wasn't it Trent Sr. who said that though?
Did he say that?
Like I mean, in terms of defending, I specifically remember him saying, "You are what you can defend." Right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. You're right.
So,
by the way, I only joke about that because I think for Senior, my sense is he's pretty he's not going to be soft on his son and be like, oh, I'm going to shield him from criticism. No,
right.
If anything else,
you a sucker.
Yeah, exactly. It's the other approach. So I respect Gary a lot. I'm looking forward to speaking with him again in studio. So Precious is the other player that I thought would take a step forward this year. Didn't really happen for him. I still think he's the second best prospect on the team, and I want to ask if sort of you still see that, and if there are any sort of small marginal improvements you saw from Precious this year, despite the fact that he objectively had a pretty disappointing season.
Yeah, I would agree that he is the second best prospect on the team just because you look at his age, you look at the potential. The ceiling that he has is very tantalizing, right? Like when we talk about switchable defenders, he is literally switchable 1 through 5, right? And so I think that is the temptation with him. That is what's so appealing about him. And it's really a question of his offense getting to a point where he isn't such an overwhelming negative. And obviously we had high hopes with the 3-point shot after what we saw in the second half of last season after the All-Star break. But, he shot 27% for this season. In terms of attacking the basket, there was some progress with the free throw shooting. He was 60% last year. He's up to 70% now. And, hopefully that continues to trend in the right direction because over the 3 seasons, that's something that has consistently gone up 50, 60, now 70. And yeah, I think confidence was a big issue down the stretch. You could just see he didn't have that same swagger, that same attitude. I think that was what really stood out to me because last season, even when he was struggling, every game he would come out and play with this force, right?
Yep.
For better or worse,
Yeah.
And so to see him sort of continually get more timid, that is something that showed me that he had just completely lost his confidence. And hopefully, this is a chance for him to just reset, go to work this summer, and hopefully have the season that many were expecting coming into this one.
Yeah. He is, by the way, like one of those guys that consistently, when you go to practice, you and I go to practice, and they open the doors and everything like that, Precious works, man. He's
Yep.
just continuously there. Like there's very few games or very few days when he was healthy where you got into practice and you didn't see him working out. It's like the section of the court that's like right beside where the reporters scrum anyway. So you can't miss him, but he does put in the work. So I definitely trust that he'll eventually put it together. But I think maybe even just looking at the roster as a whole, and I think that my last 2 points were really just like, look, the Raptors clearly had a super big lack of shooting, right? The league average for shooting this season for three-point shooting across the league averaged 37.7%. The Raptors had one guy who was above that in OG Anunoby, and he was at 38.7, so essentially average. Like, the fact that the whole team was average or below average from shooting threes is just such a disappointing thing to see in a modern game. And I feel like in addition to that being a vital guard skill that the Raptors just didn't have a lot of, they didn't have a lot of guys who can really handle and sort of get downhill either. So I think to me, there has to be serious questions looked at in terms of like, what are Masai and Bobby building here? And when they had the decision at the trade deadline, when they were 4 games under 500 and they had an opportunity to pivot in the other direction, move some pieces, and tank. By the way, if they did that, there'd be so little heat on the front office right now. It's actually kind of funny. It would be very, very funny if they had just literally waved the white flag. I think everyone would still be pretty happy with the front office and understanding of the decision. But because they chose to sort of buy in and add Jakob Poeltl, I do wonder, like, okay, so now you actually have the onus to make this a winning product. And to me, this summer for Masai and Bobby, I'm really curious to see like how they get out of this because from the outside, and obviously we are not nearly as like creative or insightful and all that kind of stuff as they are. But on the surface, what it looks like is the Raptors have either to let go of 3 key like starters and assets on the team in free agency, or you buy into this whole group again. And, even though that probably is the more pragmatic thing to do, it's definitely not the sexy thing to do. It doesn't necessarily create a lot of excitement when we're like, all right, we're going to bring back the same group that just disappointed you this past season. So what do you think they're going to do in the offseason? Because to me, they kind of box themselves in. They have really only one choice.
Yeah, I mean, they've dug themselves a hole. You're in a position where you don't want to continue the trend that you've had since the championship, where you've lost key players for nothing, right? And so you want to bring back, whether it's to continue a long-term relationship or to at least maintain asset value to trade them later. You want to bring back all 3 of, Fred, Yak, and Gary. And then how do you sort of make adjustments from there? I think that's where I was a little concerned with Masai's presser.
Okay.
Because I think there were multiple times like you could just poke holes in what he was saying because he was almost speaking to both sides of the conversation.
Yeah.
Like for example, when he said, what's really the difference between 41 wins and 48 wins? Well,
I mean,
48 wins would have got you the 5th seed and you would have been playing the Cavs right now. And you talked about how you want to get Scottie playoff experience. You want to get Precious playoff experience. So now all of a sudden you threw that out the window. If you didn't care about getting the 48 wins, why didn't you go for like 35 wins?
Yeah.
And get yourself in position for like a top 8 pick. And so I think those things I look at and say, because you remember that trip when, they had the 2 games against Washington. They played the Clippers, the Lakers, the Nuggets. Yep. Everyone viewed that as a huge, swing point for the season. And they went 1-4 on that trip. And you're like, you know what? They were 32 and 36. And you're like, maybe just let go of the rope. Right. And so if you had the concerns that you had, where Masai has already admitted that it was early as late November that he felt something was off, why did they still continue this push?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. Sorry,
and so that's where I'm like, I don't really know what way they're leaning at this point. And so that is what makes me concerned, um, because they kind of just went about this season and let things play out without really just having a definitive stance. And now you're stuck again with this offseason where you literally have to be perfect just to be good again.
Yeah. By the way, if if the front office buys into the same group and mostly just comes back with a new coach, and some minor tweaks, I do feel like, I mean, first off, it is unlikely that it's just going to fix everything. But I mean, there's a chance where some of the young guys, you put them in new roles, you get more production out of them. Like I can see it. Like I don't think that's likely. I wouldn't predict that as likely, but I can see the path to that. If that is the case, whoever is getting hired here in Toronto will have a great chance of winning Coach of the Year, because that essentially is a great path forward for a new coach. But anyway,
Well, I don't think you want to win Coach of the Year here because that probably means you're getting fired soon.
would be the fourth one of a let go under Masai. The worst thing to do in Toronto. You're right, exactly right, to win Coach of the Year. All right, V. Well, listen, I'd love to go through some of the finer points, but I'm going to call up Savannah after this break. But before we go, V, we've obviously invited you to a season-ending thank you dinner for the Raptors show, me and Alex. And I don't know if you got my text, but there's a karaoke portion afterwards too. So would you like to put in a karaoke song request right now, live on air?
You know what? My usual go-to
Yeah.
is Getting Jiggy with It, Will Smith.
Okay.
So I will roll with that.
Oh, okay. All right. I will add it to the rundown.
But I will quickly say, thank you for all your support in terms of having me on the show this season.
Of course, man.
And even with this dinner, again, that's not something you have to do, but I think it just speaks to who you are.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Congrats on all the success you've had with the show, and keep it going, man.
All right, man. I appreciate you. All right. Vivek Jacob, Raptors.com. Appreciate you. All right. We are going to take this break. I've been your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. When we come back, Savannah Hamilton. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, Wim Lou. We'll be joined on the line by Raptors sideline reporter Savannah Hamilton on the second half of this program. Savannah, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Will, I got you.
What's going on, Sav?
Not much. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. The stress of planning, this is like the most planning I put into anything. We have like 20 people coming to this thank you dinner. So, you know, this is all the stressful planning is done. You know, I got all the venues booked, everything like that, and looking forward to seeing you there, man.
Yeah, I saw the very formal invite, and I was impressed. I won't lie. You got the party and the after party planned.
Yeah. I wasn't sure people could make it if I didn't put in those TTC instructions or parking instructions. Really treating this thing like it's a wedding or something. It's really just a dinner and a karaoke. It's a very standard Friday. Yeah, Sav. We you know I ended the first segment with V on this. But I guess I'll start it with you. So I asked him for one karaoke request because I just assumed he was coming to the second portion of it, and he asked for Getting Jiggy With It by Will Smith, which I'm very looking forward to seeing V perform both the singing and the dancing to that one. But yeah, what is your request? Perhaps something from John Mayer or something from Alicia Keys? You know,
I'm impressed that you remember that those are my two favorite artists, because I normally would go with like No One from Alicia Keys. Like that's my belted out song. But I think for the vibes, just to up the mood in this case, I think I'm going to go with the Earth, Wind, Fire, September.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Change
all
it
right.
up.
That's pretty good. All right. This is great. I'm excited.
Countdown to NBA training camp.
What's that?
Countdown this training camp in September.
I guess so. Yeah. No, this is I'll be on vacation in September. I'm not gonna lie. So that's why I'm getting down September. Okay. So we the first half of the program we went through one half of my season-ending 10 things column. The second half I want to get through here with you, Sav, and we'll start with Fred VanVleet, which, you know, honestly, this is one of those things where I thought I was being more balanced with it, but when I read it back, I was kind of like, damn, like some of the stuff in here is just, it's not looking pretty, right? I kind of highlighted a lot of the shot, you know, performances. Like there's a 4 of 18, there was a 3 of 14, there was a 3 of 15, there was another 3 of 15, there was a 3 of 9, there was a 4 of 12, there was 7 of 22, there was a 5 of 25 over 2 games against Boston at the end of the season. There was 1 of 6 in the fourth quarter in the play-in game, and then I highlighted a couple more.
Let it go, man.
I mean, damn, I'm sorry, Fred, but no, I mean, like, do you think it's too reductive to say that Fred's season really just came down to a lack of shot making?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like the article that you wrote, I appreciated just how much details and depth that you went into it, because I think that that's where a lot of opinions get lost in. Like they get lost in opinions rather than facts and stats. And that's something that I always look towards. And so even though you're dropping all these numbers, they speak to the season. And that's exactly what kind of was like that, what was happening that we saw unfold before our eyes. And I think that was what Masai Ujiri was even touching on in like the halfway mark after trade deadline. He was saying they were playing selfish basketball, and you know, you can't have numbers like those. You straight up, like, you can't be shooting 1 for 12 from 3-point land and you're, you know, the primary guard on the team and you lose to Boston and Boston's not even playing their starters. Like there's just some games that are, to be quite honest, like almost not excusable.
Right.
And I'm not trying to pin this solely on Fred, of course. Like there's many other factors as I listened to the first half of you guys talking, and like, but you know, that's something that definitely stood out to me. And like just actually like watching it and like thinking about the season back, and like not just the stats that you pulled, but also the games that those stats were in were always like those nail biter games. So you know, you make a great point, and I would have to double down on it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think the context of some of those games, because I think that's where I sort of talked about, like, you know, 1 or 2 more shots in some of these games really could have been the difference between the Raptors making it in the play-in or making it to the playoffs. And yeah, I mean, but I think ultimately the Raptors still do need guard play on this team. I think even despite some of the lopsided shooting numbers, like the Raptors, when Fred VanVleet was on the floor, it was a team best plus 195. Like no one else won their minutes more than when Fred was on the floor for the Raptors. And I think my takeaway from that is they clearly need somebody to play in that role. But ideally, they either need Fred to play a lot better in that role, or for someone to upgrade and come into that spot and play the role of a lead guard but bring better production than sort of what Fred did this season. I mean, I guess the big question all season has been like, are you re-signing him, and sort of what's it going to cost, and if not, what are you doing? I think relatively in terms of what it's going to cost, we have some kind of idea. You know, we saw the, you know, kind of the discussion, but also the very public denial from Fred that, you know, 4 years, 114 was never actually officially offered. But, you know, I think it would probably come around that figure where the salary lands around 30 million. He'll probably be looking for max years. Maybe, you know, if you can cut that a little bit shorter to 2 or 3, you know, I'm curious to see if that discussion goes anywhere. But ultimately, if they don't bring him back, Sav, like, do the Raptors have other options?
I think that's the biggest question right there, and this is where Masai Ujiri makes his money, and Bobby Webster for that matter, because the options are slim. Like, free agency is different, right? Like, you know, there's also a lot of trades that could happen in the league. We don't know what the league's gonna look like, even like in a month from now after all the movement's done and stuff like that. But like in terms of Fred VanVleet, like, you know, I think that's like the rock and the hard part. How much of an upgrade can we get? And like, let's be realistic, because, you know, obviously there's a lot of trade rumors about, you know, Damian Lillard, and wouldn't that be nice? But,
Yeah.
you know, just being realistic with like money and value, and then also like what the upgrade could be. Like, currently right now, like, who are the guards on the free agency market outside of him that are what you would say on paper an upgrade?
Yeah, like
right? Like, it's
Kyrie,
kind of
for
unclear.
example. But like,
Well,
the Raptors don't
is
have.
that an upgrade though? Like,
We
in
don't even
terms
have
of
cap
like
space.
what
Period.
talk about locker room culture,
Oh
like
yeah, that too.
that's the first thing I think of in
That's
that
fair.
case. And don't get me wrong, I love Kyrie's game.
Everyone loves
Um,
Kyrie's game. You can't love basketball and not love
exactly.
Kyrie's game. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Well, we saw him, like, even that was a game, right? When he was playing for Brooklyn was in Toronto, and he hit that game-winning shot. Like, right, I
yeah,
think it might have even been right above Fred.
it was.
Like,
It was right
yeah,
above Fred. I remember that play
the
very
parody, yeah.
distinctly. Yep.
So that's like that's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, you know, Kyrie aside, who else? You know, like, it would be
Mhm.
nice to, you know, think about other guards, like say if a Jalen Brunson was on the market right now, like, that would be a cool upgrade potentially, if like on court wise, statistic wise. But, you know, it's not the situation that we're in, and I don't think Fred himself is exactly happy with the numbers that he put up this year, as these are some like of his career lows.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a rock and hard spot, really.
For sure. Yeah, and the one thing I would find promising is that after Jakob arrived, Fred VanVleet's average in assists rose to 8.6 per game. Like, that's really good. And I feel like clearly there was more of a pick and roll presence when you had the other part of it, which is a big who can screen effectively and dive the way Yak did. So I think that did help stabilize things. I still foresee this, and I've thought about this all season. It's just the Raptors don't have other great alternatives. So it's not necessarily just like we got to get rid of them. I think it's like, what do you replace him with? And I don't really see that path. So I still think the Raptors ultimately re-sign him. But I would be leery to give him the full 4 years, especially with some of the performances dipping. Yeah.
I think though, like a big X factor with re-signing Fred too is also the coach that you bring in, and what the
Okay.
new coach's visions could be for Fred's role.
Right.
Like, he might not have, like, potentially, I don't want to say as long of a leash because he's still an all-star, but
Mhm.
like they might want to use him in a different capacity, and maybe play him directly exactly to what was working, to your point, in the pick and roll situation with Jakob Poeltl too. So like there's that factor as well.
Yeah. No, sometimes, you know, for like one example, like I watch like Mike Conley for the Timberwolves, and you know, he's the one like really steadying presence, and he looks really calm and making the right passes, and every time he scores, it feels really impactful. Now, obviously, that team's very different because they have 2 like certified scorers in Cat and Anthony Edwards, who can, maybe they're not always consistent because they're young right now, but they're definitely very capable scorers. But you do feel like that kind of balance of like that floor leader really does seem to really be a mold that I actually wouldn't mind watching on this team either. Another guy who could just take over, like let's say, for example, Fred left. I mean, you would assume the point guard responsibilities would fall to Scottie. Now, my headline for this was just like, I didn't think Scottie had the breakout year that, you know, the front office was expecting. I think the plan coming into the year was Scottie's going to take a next step forward. Scottie even talked about it preseason. He was like, my goals are to make an all-star. My goals are to make, you know, an all-defensive team. I mean, obviously those things aren't really happening, but I think overall, like, the idea was the front office thought Scottie would take another jump and that it would sort of drag the Raptors with them. I didn't really think that happened, and I think it was kind of really strange year, right? You think about like at the start of it, even before any games were played, Nick Nurse was talking about the biggest challenge for Scottie this season is going to be bringing the same joy and the same enthusiasm as he had last season, and sort of not treating it like a job. And then you had like, Masai fly out to Brooklyn to deliver hard truths to him. You had Thad talk about, well, he might be in a sophomore slump, but also at the same time, we saw also how, those two kind of got into it before a game where the Raptors beat Portland in Toronto. You saw Fred kind of call him the golden child. Like it was really an up and down sort of thing for him. The good thing was, I thought second half of the season, he really stabilized, and I felt like he was a bigger part of the on-court play, both offensively and defensively. But at the same time, I think what the Raptors are really looking for is to take another step forward. Like I thought he was able to get back to last year's level pretty effectively, but can he get to the next step? And I feel like, Sav, like that's got to be the biggest question. Like how do the Raptors get Scottie Barnes to the level that we all see the talent, but can he do that consistently?
I think what happened this year, from just pure observation on my end, has just been, I feel like maybe it was something to do in the off season, maybe him attacking his training or something different. And don't forget, even the off season is his first off season as a rookie going into a sophomore. So this is like a rookie off season still that he had last summer. And so I don't know if he understood the pressures or quite wanted to, not wanted to, but like more so rose to the occasion of a second year player. And so I think that by the time season started, it almost felt like he was catching up to where he was last year. And then it almost like you're catching up from behind. And so the time that you are in the spot where you kind of were last year, playing with a lot more of that passion, playing a lot more of that effectiveness, really, it was already January, basically just past January, like just a few days in. And so I think that's kind of what we saw. So instead of building on last year, it was getting to where you were before. And now we're like, okay, you got to where you were before. Can you build now? And so I think that's where the biggest like question mark is going to be this offseason. And I have a feeling that, he's going to work a lot harder this season. He even talked about it in the post presser of the postseason. And he talked about the fact that like it was a big mentality shift for him. And so that's something that he's working on immediately this summer. That's something that he's like going to be focusing on. And I think I believe him. Like I honestly think that that's going to be a point of emphasis, because I think he learned the hard way a little bit this season that you can't come in. I don't want to say not ready, but you can't come in and expect the production of last year to translate into this season type of thing. So I think, and that's why I asked him also in that same presser, I asked him like, do you feel any pressure? Because, it's one thing to have a rookie of the year season. Okay, great. That kind of saved you for the second year. And then it's another thing to have to you going into your third year. Cause now you're a player. Like now you are fully like, you have expectations to perform on a night to night basis now as a third year player. Like there's no more sophomore slump. There's no more protecting the kid. There's no more nothing. Like it's just, can you perform? Yes or no? And so that's why I had to ask him about the pressure. And then, so that's why he addressed it. And I think, if he's serious, and I know he is, he's going to come out a lot harder, I believe, this offseason and put a lot more tact into his training.
Yeah, no, I have full confidence. And I think that like two things can be true at once, right? Like maybe the training that he did last season, I don't doubt that he worked, but the training that he did last season, was that specific enough? Was that tailored enough to what the upcoming roles and the responsibilities that were going to be on him this season? And then, can you adapt that as well? Because I do think that is sort of what the new coach is going to be in for, define everyone's role so everyone knows what they can work on in the summertime, and so they can come back fully knowing what their roles are going to be and being able to step into those with no sort of like grand, allure of I might be this or I might be that. I actually really just want to come in and hear next season players come in and be like, I want to be the best in my role. Like I don't want to. I honestly don't want to hear so much like I want to be top 5 or I want to be all star or I want to be all defense. Like no, actually, I just want to see like everyone know their roles, work towards them this summer, and then come back and be more cohesive. Because I do believe in the talent. Everyone believes in the talent. It's just sort of about like needing that to happen right away. And look, obviously with a young player, you can only go through these experiences with them, right? Like you can't accelerate any of this kind of stuff. But at the same time, obviously you want to win, so you need this to happen right now. Yeah.
My only caveat though with the whole knowing your role thing is that sometimes I wonder if a guy that knows his role, sure, he gets really good at his role, but does that allow any room for growth?
Yeah,
Can
that's
he
fair.
expand his role once he's mastered his role? Or is it forever going to be stuck in that place? And what does that service the individual player? I know, sure, as a team you might be getting results, but and then that's kind of the fork in the road that I see with like players. Like, I don't mind players having ambitions and goals and wanting to expand their game. I think this is a sign of a good, hungry, ambitious team.
Yeah.
I think it's the fact that like this team in particular, like I think there might have been individual, I don't want to say maybe individual like goals or incentives that didn't align all together. It didn't come together.
Right.
But I'm not mad at players for having them because, when like even to like back in my days when I was a player, like, I wanted to be the best in my position. I wanted to be a lead rebounder in the league. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that, like, and stuff like that. And that's not oftentimes vocalized to media, but in this case, like early in the season, it was. But that being said, like, what's wrong with, kind of wanting to also dip into a little bit of scoring at times and dip into this or dip into that because what's gonna, like, you don't know how high your ceiling is if you're never allowed the opportunity to even like try a different direction.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. That's why we need a true hooper like you on the show every week. Savannah, I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing you Friday, and thank you for all the appearances you made on this program. We're gonna reward you with one singular dinner, so I hope you really enjoy.
That's it. No, man, thank you so much. You guys like have just an awesome show. I know I expressed that to you, but I'm gonna say it on air as well. Like, I appreciate everything you guys do for the game and for the Raptors community in Canada.
All right, that's dope. All right, that does it for us today. I've been your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review the show. Still above Draypod. I just checked this morning. Someone actually wrote in a specific review putting us above the Draymond Show. So congrats to that person. Anyway, thanks to Vivek Jacob and Savannah Hamilton for joining us on the program. Thanks to pro producer Derek Brandale, Danielle Gauthier filling in for Jennifer Rolnick with the YouTube stream. And me and Alex will be back on the show tomorrow.